Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome inside the Guilty as Charged podcast. Happy to be. Oh my gosh,
Gotcha.
I'm sorry. I can't hold it together right now. I won the picks contest, so I made Alex buy me a yellow jersey, and in between us starting the countdown and now Tyler also put on a yellow jersey. So Alex, how you doing, man?
Fuck both of you. I'm pissed at Matt Stafford for losing me the picks contest. I don't know how this happened, but yeah, Steven is wearing a piss-stained yellow jersey. I could have had a white Herbert, but Matt Stafford decided to throw the picks contest away. So congrats to Steven. He won though. He has terrible taste in jerseys, but it's cool and great that you guys double teamed on me. So
Well,
yeah, watch someone's gonna send Alex a yellow jersey now just to be fun. And I can't wait. So Tyler is here as well. He's got a fresh beard for the first time. Seeing Tyler with some facial hairs. Tyler, how you doing, man?
I'm great. I must ask you a question, but I'm shaving it for later.
you guys are double teaming on me on the beard too because I can't even grow.
Alex, can you stop talking about us double teaming you? I really appreciate
yeah.
Well,
I'm too loopy. I didn't even think about
that. My mind went straight to offensive line play because that's kind of the theme of the
you're
night.
the Mormon on the show. Of course, your mind would go to offensive line play.
Jason said he spilled mustard on your shirt. Oh my gosh, that's funny. But yeah, so we had a really fun evening already. We got to interview Ode Abuji earlier this evening. Had a great conversation with him talking about the season and his recovery and things like that. So that's going to be dropping tomorrow. So I hope you guys enjoy that one. He was a fantastic interview. So can't thank him enough for joining us. So today's show is going to be similar to last week's. We're going to be doing a position review of the Chargers season. Today we're going to be doing offensive line and running backs. So Alex's favorite positions. He gets to look at the yellow jerseys and then get to talk about offensive line and Larry Roundtree tonight. So it's going to be a fun one regardless. I think we're going to have some good conversation about those two position groups and kind of what to look forward to next year. But first and foremost, we wanted to chat about the decision by Sean Payton to retire, because obviously the Chargers have some coaching connections there with Joe Lombardi, Frank Smith, and Michael Wilhoit, who were all on the New Orleans staff. Although Frank Smith wasn't really recently. I think Frank Smith was like early 2010s. But, I think it's definitely worth mentioning here. And we, of course, can talk about it as a whole because Sean Payton obviously was a huge pillar of NFL football in recent memory. So, Tyler, what was your reaction to Sean Payton retiring? And then what's your initial thought process in terms of potentially poaching some talent, whether it be through trade or pending free agents or potential cut candidates as well?
Yeah, and I mean, good for him, I guess. It doesn't seem like he's really retiring. He's just kind of like stepping away from the Saints for a bit. I don't know how that contract situation shakes out, but hey, he looked happy talking about it at that press conference. So if he's happy, that's great. He obviously brought a championship to that city with Drew Brees. So good for them. I always respected, the way they did things. And it was fun watching them. I did almost become a Saints fan instead of a Chargers fan when I was kind of picking, mostly because Reggie Bush went there. So it's like, and I'm a USC fan. So that was kind of something I was looking at, but I went with the Chargers, and then the Saints won a championship in about 2 years, and I'm still a Chargers fan. So unfortunately, they got the better end of it. Now good for him. But my initial reaction after that was, well, who can we get? Me, and if you've been in you two are my fantasy football league, and my thing is I'm going to draft or trade for every player possible. I don't care if it screws up my entire cap situation. I am the New Orleans Saints of fantasy football, and to me, when opportunity presents itself, you want to take it. And so, to me, I'm well, we can talk about it once Alex does his reaction, but yeah, I'm looking at some of these players and thinking, there aren't as many players as I would have hoped that were either available. Like, I forget who the article was today, but they talked about how a lot of their young nucleus isn't going to be available. So that's kind of a bummer. And there aren't a ton of players that are on that team that are going to be available, but you can see some of those veterans. I think it's worth a look.
It was Steven Ruiz, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah, can we ask him to take Jared Cook back now? Do you think they want him back? I don't know. As far as the coaching connections, I think it'll be interesting. Maybe, hey, maybe given Lombardi's connections there, he'll get some kind of head coaching interview. I don't think that's crazy to think about, although I think they'll probably look at their internal candidates first. That's really the first place my mind went, is what guys with the Chargers could theoretically be back on that coaching staff whenever it's formed post Sean Payton. As far as Sean Payton, I have fewer nice things to say. I mean, as the instigator of Bountygate and the guy who took a year off because of it, and then came back and then completely blew up the Saints cap and then decided, I'm going to take a year off. It's sort of like someone who just poked a bunch of holes in the bottom of the boat and then decided to swim off. He's a character. So it's going to be fun when he's in the NFC East after Jerry Jones pays him a ton of money next year and trades a first-round pick for him. No, I think, like Tyler said, what the Saints built there was overall good, even though I don't like Sean Payton, and I'm sure that'll be interesting down the road. I don't have a ton of instant Chargers reactions. I don't know if there's like a lot of players they can poach, just because the Saints have so many guys under contract right now.
Yeah.
People have talked about, like, can a guy become available after they trade, and someone like Lattimore. I don't think it'll happen, even though the Chargers have the cap space to make it happen. I think the Saints would absorb a lot of dead cap with that kind of deal too. So don't think much of the Sean Payton thing initially, but things could always change, and the coaching candidates move fast.
Yeah, Sean Payton retiring, it definitely caught me by surprise. I figured that, like, the rumors from a couple of weeks ago were him trying to be like, hey, like, go get me a quarterback. I'm sick of not having a guy like Drew Brees on my team. Granted, he did choose Taysom Hill for that very reason, and now they're going to be stuck in cap hell in part because he chose Taysom Hill. So it is, a rather interesting decision to, leave this team with negative $70 million in cap space. And of course, the Saints have been in negative cap space for years, and every single year they are able to figure it out. With their GM and their cap wizard, who I forget his name is. But the Saints are going to be in an interesting spot because, could they kind of shed a bunch of talent? Sure. But most of their core is intact. Like, they'll lose Marcus Williams, my guy from Utah, but they have Damario Davis, they have Cam Jordan, they have Marcus Davenport, they have David Onyemata, they have all these players, Ryan Ramczyk, they'll lose to Ron Armstead most likely. But if they bring back Jameis, I feel like they can still be pretty competitive. I mean, if they're able to, kind of keep the same coaching staff intact without Sean Payton, whether that be promoting Dennis Allen or not, it's just the decision of, well, should they do that, or should they rebuild, or kind of what the thought process there is. And I think a lot of that depends on what Tom Brady decides to do. If he does decide to retire, then I don't think that the Saints are going to be moving any players, because they're going to look at that as, the prime opportunity to win the division again. And rightfully so, because the other two teams in that division are awful. So I think it's TBD if they do decide to, kind of blow it up a little bit. They're not trading Marcus Lattimore. They're not trading Ryan Ramczyk. They're not trading their young players. And that's what Steven Ruiz from The Ringer was talking about, because that's bad business, right? Like, you don't trade young, talented, homegrown players who are still in their prime, especially when they're at premium positions like corner and right tackle. And Marcus Davenport, I feel like, is in that conversation too. So if they do decide to go rebuild, then sure, potentially Cam Jordan, Damario Davis could become available. The Saints could definitely save some money by trading them. It's just a question of how much are they willing to go into a rebuild, and how much does that cost a team like the Chargers, who are potentially trying to pry away a future Hall of Fame edge rusher and one of the best linebackers of his generation, kind of thing.
I'm all for someone like a Cam Jordan. Obviously the price has to be right, whatever. But
yeah.
He'll be 33 this year. But it's kind of the same conversation that we have about, if you want Williams for 18, why not get Adams for 25? Cam Jordan is going to be more expensive than Nwosu, and you are going to have to trade for him. But why not pay a little bit more? And instead of bringing back Nwosu, pay a little bit more. Get the guy who had 51 pressures, 13 sacks, and 40 with 3 run stops. And really the difference, if you look at it this way, the difference in Nwosu's contract and what Jordan's contract is is really just cutting Brian Bulaga. So if you cut Bulaga, you kind of make up the difference there. And also, I think if they trade for him, they're also obviously letting Nwosu go at that point. And trades are not included in compensatory pick calculations. So obviously, their 17th pick in the 3rd round is not going to be worth as much as the compensatory pick in the 4th or whatever they get next year. But you could kind of play that game where you recoup some of your losses by because we don't expect Kaiser White to return. If you trade for Cam Jordan, and Nwosu is going to be gone, so you might be able to get some compensatory picks there and work that out. So that's the only one I'm really for at this point. I would say like Damario Davis is great, but White not re-signing indicates they want to put their money elsewhere, and so they wouldn't just get another linebacker. I don't think. If money is the issue, then they would have just stuck with White. I wouldn't see why you would trade for Damario Davis and take on that contract and his age. So really, the only one that I'm really interested in is Cam Jordan, and even then, I just don't expect it to happen.
Really quickly address the Kaiser White thing right there. We obviously haven't heard anything concrete there. Just kind of seems like the math is pointing towards Kaiser White not returning. So just mention that quickly. Tyler's like moving on from White. We don't know anything for certain yet. Obviously, it's January, but it just kind of feels like Kaiser White is not going to be on this team next year. Alex, feel free to jump in now after Tyler's thoughts there.
Yeah, no, I think the one thing I thought was funny is that Bulaga has just become the justifying any spending moves. So anytime we cut him, we're like, well, we have this extra 11 million that we can use. We can spend it on something. So I do kind of think that's funny. But no, I mean, there's a couple guys that they can get from the Saints, and if you're talking about the difference between Cam Jordan and Uchenna Nwosu, then I think that makes sense to just go after him. He's only 33 years old, hasn't had many injuries in his career, so I would be all for it. But I don't think they're going to be moving on from Cam Jordan at this point. So remains to be seen.
Yeah, it does remain to be seen. And listen, Cam Jordan is fantastic, and I totally understand the people in the chat saying, he's older, he would cost a lot. I mean, Cam Jordan is arguably, one of the best players of our generation. And I still think he showed this year that he's got a lot of good ball ahead of him. And we're also seeing a bunch of players, play longer in their career. So, I think that would be worthwhile. As for trading for Damario Davis, I'm kind of out on that one. I think he has like 3 years left on his deal. And linebacker is a position that where you kind of fall off a cliff while he's been awesome. I think that could happen sooner than later. I think I'm focusing in on some potential free agent connections here. The Saints, really the most obvious cut candidate for the Saints this year is their cornerback, Bradley Roby. Bradley Roby, of course, drafted by the Broncos, although he missed Brandon Staley and Ronaldo Hill by a year. But he does have familiar with Michael Wilhoit. He is a slot corner, has that flexibility to play inside outside. He is a former 4-3 guy. So that would add a good amount of speed to the team. I think he's a solid replacement for Chris Harris. And then PJ Williams is somebody that I advocated for signing last year. He, of course, returned to the Saints. He's like a safety, nickel, slot hybrid sort of player that obviously has familiarity with Michael Wilhoit again, that I think would provide some good depth. And then I think a sleeper candidate here is potentially receiver Traquan Smith. Obviously, kind of fits that Jalen Guyton, speedster, slot kind of player. He was with the Saints, obviously, with Joe Lombardi, very familiar there. So I think those three are the kind of players that I think the Chargers could be keeping an eye on. As much as I would love it, Marcus Williams is going to be way too expensive for them. But really, those three are kind of the three players that I'm focusing in on in terms of Saints connections.
Yeah, I mean, Bradley Roby, I think the Chargers were looking for a corner in that draft that he was in. I'm assuming they did their homework on him, although they did take Verrett over him. But the slot group is really, really weak. And I talked about this on Twitter, much to my surprise. The top two really guys listen, these composite rankings, I think they are legitimate. I think they work to at least give you a really solid indication of how guys are on a per play basis. Everything's working out. Devontae Adams was my wide receiver 1, all that good stuff. So I did the same thing for slot corners, for those who don't know, and Chris Harris Jr. was top 2. So I
Yeah.
don't really like that's kind of the slot corner market right now. There weren't a ton of guys that are available that also have played, 100 or more slot snaps last year or were even healthy. So like, yeah, I mean, I'm kind of for Bradley Roby because there's not really a ton of options out there right now. And right now, also, that no one's really, I don't think anyone's projected the Chargers to take a corner in this draft. And, maybe it's because they value a slot corner guy later on in the second round or something. But a lot of guys are doing, interior defensive line, offensive tackle, even wide receiver, edge rusher. No one's really talking about corner, slot corner. So, them shoring that up in the draft, or excuse me, in free agency, if they cut Bradley Roby, that works for me. I think it should be an upgrade over Chris Harris Jr. But then again, like I said, he was top 2 for among free agents this year. So what are you gonna do?
Any thoughts there, Alex?
No, you guys are nerds for doing composite rankings, and also I do think. I mean, I don't know. I feel like the Chargers not having been mocked a cornerback in the draft isn't a big deal at this point. I mean, they haven't.
Yeah.
I mean, there's not really a lot out there right now in terms of like connecting the Chargers to a corner. I also think people are going to move up and down, but also hard to mock a corner in the first round when the GM doesn't take cornerbacks in the draft. That that's a little bit of a difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah, they're the slot corner group in terms of free agents. Like I feel like K'Wan Williams. I don't know where he ranked. I can't remember where he ranked in Tyler in your composite rankings, but I feel like he's probably like the best one still. I mean, Bryce Callahan to me feels like, pencil him in. He was with Brandon Staley in Chicago. He was with Brandon Staley in Denver. And it's a little redundant. Obviously, you're swapping out former Bronco for former Bronco, but I feel like Bryce Callahan is a little younger. He's probably better. As long as they are able to supplement the depth behind him, I feel like that would be okay. But they have to find some kind of upgrade over Chris Harris, and I feel like relying on a rookie is probably not the solution there. So if the Saints do move on from Bradley Roby, I feel like that would be kind of my preference there in terms of signing somebody to fill that position. But we'll have to see. Again, in terms of Saints players, like I said, of course, everybody's going to freak out like Tom Telesco's not doing anything, but these players have to become available first. So that's just kind of where I'm at. Obviously, things will stay fluid there, and we'll keep you guys updated. All right. Any other thoughts here as it pertains to the Chargers potentially poaching some talent from the Saints?
Nope.
All right. So we're going to get into our main topic of the day, which of course is reviewing the Chargers offensive line and running back rooms from this past season. We'll also talk about some potential strategies to improve those units next year. As Tom Telesco said, they're not going to look at this offense and just kind of run it back. Like they are going to add some bodies and improve. So let's talk about the offensive line first, and then we'll get into the running backs. I think this is, arguably the most improved unit from last season. Actually, not arguably. I think it easily is the most improved unit from last season. And that was something that obviously Brandon Staley mentioned, that they needed to get a better structure around Justin Herbert as kind of their main mission last offseason. So, Alex, your thoughts here on the Chargers kind of accomplishing that mission and really improving this offensive line this year?
Yeah, I mean, the offensive line had been unwatchable in recent years whenever you would get film. And so, the fact that they had Slater, Lindsley, and Filer and just guys that they could stick in there and really not have to worry about almost at all, like in any game, that's just such a huge upgrade over what they had previously. I do think it was a significant upgrade. I don't know if, Stephen, you have any rankings that would tell us where they sort of finished around the league. I don't know if they're like offensive line rankings.
I think they were 5th in PBE after being
pass blocking. Blocking efficiency. I mean, 23 spots is a huge upgrade there. So that's something to keep track of. I guess for me, the story with offensive line is how different things might have been if Brian Bulaga stayed healthy, because we talked about that sort of heading into the postseason, with Storm Norton having to play so many of these high profile games. and just not frankly performing as well in them. I feel like he was sort of the key to the whole thing. And we just talked with Ode Ibushi, who talked about how well that starting five was gelling. When the Chargers had it prior to week 1 at Washington and then didn't have it through the rest of the season. So I think the story is, how much they improved, obviously, but also how much there is to go. If you do go get a right tackle in the draft, Trevor Penning or, someone like that, and then continue to build out that offensive line, or, you re-sign Ode Ibushi, but also pursue some more guards, maybe somewhere in the draft, or start Stevens' guy, Brendan Hymas, which, would make him very happy. I think there's a lot of ways that you can go with the offensive line to boost it even more than we've already boosted it.
Yeah, absolutely. And just really quickly, as Tyler said, they did finish 5th in pass blocking efficiency rating. They actually finished 13th in team pass blocking win rate on ESPN, and run blocking win rate, they were 20th. So last year they were 31st in pass block win rate and 32nd in run block win rate. So those were, huge jumps forward. I mean, it's not very common that we see those kind of leaps, and I think every team now is kind of searching for that kind of thing. I had to laugh today. I was listening to one of the podcasts on the Athletic Football Show, and they were talking about it was Dane Brugler and I forget the other guy, but they were talking about how the Bears should approach like protecting Justin Fields, and Dane Brugler was like, yeah, well, they can look at the Chargers as like a blueprint for how to fix the offensive line. And I was like, yeah, like, let's go. Like, how crazy is that looking back on things? But I think the general improvement for this group was just insane. And like, I actually went into like every single week watching film, like really excited to see how they performed, against pressure looks, against and handling stunts and everything like that. And like, it was fun for me watching the Chargers offensive line on film this year, whereas opposed to last year, every single time I pop on the tape and just want to bang my head against the wall. So the improvement here was crazy high. And of course it helps to have, Rashaan Slater and Corey Linsley have second team all pro kind of seasons. And then like you guys were saying, right? Like you still have a weakness at right tackle. We'll see what happens at right guard. But from center to left tackle, this team is in such a good position next year and the year after that, when Filer's contract will come up. But the improvements on the left side and center could not have been any better than what we got.
No, the AFC West did a really good job. Well, two teams in the AFC West did a very good job of reshuffling their offensive line. The Raiders, not so much, but they didn't really invest as much as the Chargers did, although they did take Leatherwood. But it's so impressive. We went into last season thinking Brian Bulaga was the only guy we knew for sure about. Everything else was up in the air. And the idea that they wouldn't bring back Lamp, they wouldn't bring back Feeney, they wouldn't bring back Tevye. It's like, man, you really should have some depth going into the free agency or the draft or something. But they figured it out. I mean, Rashaan Slater, Matt Filer, Corey Linsley, Ode Ibushi when he was healthy. A fantastic group of 4. Brian Bulaga unfortunately got hurt, obviously. Storm Norton allowing the most pressures in the league. It just did not work out, but it's kind of also an unfair situation. And they had to pass protect 72 times in the final game. So he probably wouldn't have been that bad if they didn't have to do that. But, I think regardless of what happened to Bulaga, I think they would be in the same position this year. If they have one more year on his contract, you're looking for, a guy in the draft in the second or third round, to bridge after Brian Bulaga, or, same thing this offseason. You're probably going to find a veteran in free agency, and you're going to draft someone in the second or third round, maybe to bridge between that veteran and your new offensive line moving forward. So I think they're kind of in the same spot there, but either way, just a fantastic job. I can't believe I don't know if they finished here, but I believe at least before the Raiders game, they were ahead of the Patriots in pass blocking efficiency. And to me, like, the Patriots are just always that standard of being, top 5, top 10 offensive line. And for the Chargers to be even in that conversation, let alone ahead of them, it was fantastic. And Frank Smith and Sean Surratt, we talked to Ode Ibushi about, just did a fantastic job because, Rashaan Slater was pro ready, and Matt Filer was a good veteran. Corey Linsley was, an all pro, and a pro bowler. He wasn't all pro, not a pro bowler, right?
Who? Sorry.
Corey Linsley. No, it's all good.
Corey was both, I think, wasn't he?
He didn't have one heading into the season. He wasn't one of them. Anyway.
Last year he was not a pro bowler. He was an all pro last year.
Yeah. Anyway, but even though those guys were very talented, were very good, for them to all gel that fast and do as well as they did against the Washington football team week 1 was fantastic. You know, you have Michael Schofield come in for Ode Abuji, and on a critical 4th down, he's trap blocking Myles Garrett, and they pick up the 1st down. Like, the guys were just ready to go into the game. You know, Brandon Hymus, kind of an odd situation, but I do think he looked good. He will be ready. Trey Pipkins improved. Storm Norton, I do think improved. He just isn't a good tackle. And then we won't talk about Senio Kelemete, but overall, I think they were very, very solid. And, you know, if Hymus, if they bring back Questenberry and Hymus is your backup guard on the left or right side, and you have, you know, Trey Pipkins as your swing tackle, and, you know, you really, even if you draft a right tackle, you have a guy now at every backup spot who has been drafted by your team, which I don't think the Chargers have had for a very long time. It's been like, oh, okay, Sam Tevi. Well, next guy up is Trent Scott. You know, not that Trey Pipkins is that all that amazing, but I feel better knowing that the Chargers actually invested and have draft picks behind their good starters rather than just some kind of like, I don't know, this guy you've never heard of who isn't very good. Good luck, Justin Herbert. I feel like they're going to be, you know, obviously a lot better off this year. So them only having to address one spot this year is great.
Yeah, I mean, Tyler alluded to what I was going to say. Like, the fact that we don't have to throw Trent Scott into the game, or the fact that, you know, you have 3 all-pro caliber players on that side of the line, and then that kind of lets you get away with maybe 2 injuries on it. Like, that's just something the Chargers couldn't do before, right? Like, they were basically below average most of the time, and then they were 1 injury away from being 32nd or total disaster, you know? So for me, that is the major improvement this year, that they have some consistency and they also have some, you know, promise going forward.
Yeah, you know, remember when we were like, oh shit, if Russell Okung can't come back from this lung injury or whatever, then we're just fucked all season long. Like, that was fun. So we'll, you know, I think this group to me has shown that they'll put their money where their mouth is in terms of the regime. Like, they're going to continue to build up the trenches, and it's going to be fun to see what that looks like. But, you know, generally speaking, this team is in a much better position going forward because of these, you know, things going out, or things panning out the way that they did. And I think we all kind of knew that Corey Linsley would be, you know, at least challenged for all pro season. I think it's pretty safe to say, though, that Matt Filer and even Rashaan Slater really exceeded expectations. And, you know, Tyler got to ask Ode Abuji about Rashaan Slater. And, you know, Ode had trained with Rashaan, you know, heading into the draft and in the offseason and things like that. So he obviously knew how good he could be. But, you know, the way that Rashaan really came in and just dominated from the get-go is honestly crazy to me. Also crazy that ESPN had Mac Jones higher than him in their rookie rankings, which is another thing we could potentially get into. But, you know, I remember like last year thinking, like, you know, heading into 2020, I was like, okay, we just need to get Sam Tevi to not be allowing 5 pressures a game like every other game, because Sam would have like 1 good game and then be like 5 pressures, 4 pressures, 1 pressure, 5 pressures. You know what I mean? Like, it was just like 1 every 3 games would just be awful. There was not a single game this year where Rashaan Slater allowed more than 4 pressures. And one of those games in which he did allow 4 was when he had to pass block 72 fucking times against the Raiders to end the season. And this man, like, it was crazy to me watching him every single week. He had, let me count this up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 games out of the season where he allowed 1 pressure or 0 pressures. Like, Rashaan Slater, you know, I can't speak enough about him because he really came in. I mean, we were also excited when he got drafted. And for him to exceed expectations as first or second best tackle in the draft class last year, like, it's insane. It obviously speaks to him. It speaks to this team in general and the way that Frank Smith and Sean Surratt kind of coach these guys up. But Rashaan, man, like, I can't wait to see what the sophomore leap looks like for him. We saw Tristan Wirfs took a huge leap forward. And obviously those two are kind of competing for best young tackles in the league right now. But the way that Rashaan played, man, I could not have been any happier there.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where we sort of went into week 1, and I remember I was a little bit more tepid. I was like, I don't know. Like, I mean, I think Slater's eventually going to be good, but, you know, this first game coming into Washington, you know, I feel like there's going to be some jitters, maybe the first couple weeks, and then he'll, you know, sort of hit this groove. But Steven was very confident, and then he was right. Rashaan Slater was a Pro Bowler before he really ever hit the field. He was just that kind of player. There was never really a let up, and it just kept going throughout the entire season, which is crazy considering what the Chargers have had in recent years, but also considering his age and the fact that was his first year, and that theoretically he can only get better from here.
An incredible performance the entire year. We were all very high on him. I think he was top 6 for all of us, or top 5 or top 6 for in our pre-draft rankings. But still, I didn't expect him to be like, running back, please stop helping me. I have Myles Garrett.
Right.
Please stop helping me. I literally can't. I just stop. You're making it worse for me. I'll take care of it myself. Like him doing that. It's one of the most incredible things I've ever seen a player in his first year in the league. I mean, I take that back because we have Justin Herbert on our team and Jeremy James. They had some pretty good first years too. But for an offensive lineman to be that confident after a year off like that, incredible stuff. And I almost just kind of stopped. Like you watch him and you see him do good stuff, but I almost just stopped paying attention to him. I didn't watch him during games. I just he's got it. I like whatever. It's gonna be great either way. I just really kind of stopped paying attention because he was that good. It's almost like a shutdown corner where it's like you just don't hear from him because he's just that good.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It was crazy when they came out after the game that Austin Eckler was like, yeah, Rashaan told me to stop blocking him. And I'm like, against Myles Garrett? Like, what are we doing here? Like, this is crazy. But I mean, he deserves it. And just, again, looking at his stat sheet, again, this is Pro Football Focus, my numbers are probably at least a little different, right? But, Alex mentioned that, I kind of figured that there would be some kind of rust that he would have to shake off, but I mean, he only allowed 1 pressure against the Chiefs, 1 pressure against the Raiders in the first week, 0 pressures against Washington in week 1. Granted, that team kind of, fell off the cliff after a little bit, but we all were expecting that to be the best defensive line in the league. So Rashaan was awesome this year. I thought that he really was even more impressive as a run blocker, strangely, because that man was just doing crazy things down the stretch, even after he had COVID for a week. Like, it just was so much fun watching him and Matt Filer. And I know that there still is a lot of talk about like moving Matt Filer to right tackle, and I mean, that's where you put Hymas and things like that. But with the way that left side is playing and did play this year, I think we can just kind of leave it as be and let them continue to, grow that relationship, grow that chemistry, and build on what they were doing going forward.
Yeah, I mean, we sort of just talked about it with Ibushi, and how he talked about them being contingency plans, right? Like Filer can kick out to right tackle, like we talked about all season. Never happened. But I think part of the reason it never happened, like Steven said, is just they liked Filer and Slater there, and they liked them next to Lindsley, and even if you have to deal with Storm Norton on the other side, it doesn't really make sense to break up that chemistry.
Yeah. Absolutely. So in terms of the future, right? So Michael Schofield is a free agent. Ode Ibushi is a free agent. Storm Norton is a restricted free agent. And then, of course, Brian Bulaga is this year's, cut candidate, really the only one on the Chargers. But they can save $11 million by cutting him. So let's focus in on the right tackle here, Tyler. We've done our composite rankings list. What's kind of your plan of approach to solving the right tackle spot this year, kind of where you're at in terms of your preferred approach?
Yeah, I'm definitely looking for a veteran in free agency, even if it's a 1-year rental sort of thing. I like Dennis Kelly. I think that's someone they should roll with, considering the familiarity, considering it's going to be cheap, considering the numbers are good. I mean, he started in 2020 for the Titans and gave up 0 sacks. You want a right tackle that can do that? That sounds pretty good to me. Also blocked for a guy who had 2,000 rushing yards. So, not a bad guy, pretty high up there in pass blocking efficiency this year. Is he going to be your long-term solution? No. But I think if you look at the draft, and at least the guys that I'm looking at, whether it's Penning or Bernhard Raymond or Falele or some of these other guys, I don't know if I feel comfortable taking those guys at 17 and plugging them in, A, considering the needs that the Chargers have, and B, because there's question marks about each of those guys. I don't feel like there's no Rashaan Slater in that group. Obviously, there's not even really a Christian Darrisaw, in my opinion. With Raymond, like I think General Jeremiah mocked him to the Chargers. He's going to be 25 in September, and he's just learning how to play football after coming from Austria. Falele is a super you want to build that talent, you want to work with that talent, and I trust the Chargers to do it, but he's kind of young to the position. He's from Northern Australia, so there's a lot of guys in this draft. Trevor Penning, who's, a mean dude. It would be awesome to watch him on the right side of the line. I think he's meaner than Tevin Jenkins, but he had 19 penalties last year for Northern Iowa. So it's just, there's not a single guy at that 17th spot or projected to be there that feels really, really good. So I'd like them to take a veteran, just plug him in, be, 50% better than Storm Norton. And I think we can survive for a year. I think that you can survive for a little bit and then take someone later on in the draft. I haven't looked at those guys later in the draft yet, but I think, second, third, even third round tackle just to have behind someone like Dennis Kelly, who will cost you $3, $4, $5 million at most. I think that's the way to go.
Yeah, I tend to agree with a lot of that. There's not really a lot of high value right tackle options. Like the best one is, from a quality standpoint, is probably Trent Brown, but he's coming off of a season where he had a nagging calf injury, and he's probably going to be pretty expensive compared to the other guys like Dennis Kelly that Tyler just mentioned. So I think you have to kind of weigh out the economics of that. I wouldn't be opposed to them spending a first round pick on one, but also, right, like when it comes to the offensive tackles that the Chargers can take this year, people shouldn't be expecting Penei Sewell and Rashaan Slater and that, quality of guy.
Right.
Maybe guys that are more along the lines of a Darisaw that, you sort of have to wait and, let them develop at their own pace. So I'll be curious to see if the Chargers pursue it in the first round, but I sort of doubt they would go tackle in the first round back-to-back years. So I do think that is probably more of a second, third round tendency. And, you take your chances there and see if you can hit a shot in the dark. Hopefully it works out.
Yeah, there aren't a ton of free agents this year. Tyler mentioned Dennis Kelly. I think that's probably the kind of range that you're looking for, a mid-tier veteran free agent. And I tend to agree that that's kind of the best approach. I think the goal here is not having to back yourself into a corner and you have to draft the right tackle in the first round, because right now, everybody's kind of focusing on the defensive line, but right now before free agency, right tackle is probably the biggest hole, at least of value, right? Of first round value, where, you're trying to protect Justin Herbert. So I tend to agree. You want to add a mid-level free agent. I wouldn't be shocked if they signed like a Morgan Moses to like a 2-year deal, although his numbers are not fantastic. Some of that maybe could have been, he was in New York and maybe that wasn't a great situation for him, but he does have a coaching connection. As I've mentioned, Shane Day was an assistant offensive line coach in Washington when Moses was drafted. He's spent his entire career pretty much doing the Shanahan outside zone scheme. So there is some scheme familiarity there too. He's a little older. When asked about Lyle Collins, he seems like he could potentially be a cut candidate from the Cowboys. And if that does happen, then of course, that's free agent number one. I just don't know if the Chargers would be willing to spend, $17, $18 million that it would probably take to sign him. Jermaine Ifedi wouldn't be awful, although I would rather probably have Dennis Kelly. So I tend to agree that you probably want to sign somebody for a year, maybe 2, and then not have to force yourself to drafting a tackle in the first round. I'm a much bigger fan of Trevor Penning than Tyler appears to be. And, we'll see how that pans out at the Senior Bowl. But the thing with this offensive line draft class is it's a lot of small school guys. It's Southern Utah, Central Michigan, Northern Iowa, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? I just, there always is that kind of concern about, is this guy going to come in and be an immediate quality starter? Is there going to be a lot of rust there? Is there going to be a lot of adjustment to the speed and everything like that? So I think you kind of wait till the second, third round. Ideally, add a veteran to kind of take the pressure off of him. And then I think you can bring back Storm Norton and let him and Trey Pipkins battle it out for presumably that tackle 4 spot, which is really what they should have been doing this past year. But that's another conversation.
I see the same sort of comments about, well, Herbert's mobile and they did fine. They were top 5 offense this year, so we don't have to worry about right tackle that much. They do. I mean, if you watch the game against the Cowboys, Parsons killed Storm Norton. You watch the game against the Patriots.
Max
He
Crosby
got killed. Yeah, Max Crosby. There are significant games in the AFC that they played last year, and they will be facing some of these teams next year, and definitely in the postseason. You got to find a right tackle. I'm not saying it's a round one need. I'm not saying it's spend trade for someone and spend $18 million on them, but you do have to put somebody out there that's better than Storm Norton, because the AFC is full of some good guys out there that had already had success against the Chargers. The Ravens aren't going away. The Bills aren't going away. Melvin Ingram's probably back with the Chiefs at this rate. Max Crosby's not going anywhere, so you do have to address it. I know Herbert is mobile, and he was mobile in 2020, but he got absolutely killed back there because he was always mobile, but the right tackle situation, no situation was any good. So you got to invest in it somewhere.
Yeah, and I mean, like, if the Chargers generally had pretty decent luck with injuries in 2021 compared to previous years, but like, I mean, I don't think it's a stretch to say that the loss of Brian Bulaga is straight up why they weren't in the playoffs, right? I mean, like, you can talk about that over a number of games, whether it's the Cowboys game against Parsons earlier in the year or the one that we just finished with, the Crosby game against the Chargers. So, I mean, we can say it's like not a big deal and then pretend it doesn't exist. And it's like, just put Norton and Pipkins there. But it's like, I like Tyler said, I don't think you have to take it in the first round or you have to go spend a bunch of money on a free agent. But I do think it's something you have to address going into next year, unless you just want to, go crazy and repeat history and do the same thing over again. And we're 9-8 next year.
Yeah. I think the thing with, I always get the same comments, right? It was like, oh, well, like left tackle, you only just need a left tackle. And, Tyler pointed out, like, every team that you face is going to have two guys. Like, that's the reality of the NFL, is that basically 80% of the league has two quality edge rushers that they're going to throw at both sides. So you need two tackles. Like, you just need it. And, as long as that person is serviceable, sure, like you can get by. But we had years and years and years of like, well, he's a serviceable player, like at best. Like, why would you try to continue to settle for that? So I think that, I'm never going to say no to a tackle in the first round, right? But I think the smart thing again is kind of doing a second, third rounder, a little bit of a lesser scale of like what they did last year with Ibushi and Hymas at the guard position. So I forgot to mention Cam Fleming. He's another one that would make a lot of sense. There is obviously a lot of coaching connections there because he was on the Broncos the last 2 years or the 3 years, I think. So Cam Fleming is somebody I think could make a lot of sense too. In terms of the guard, we'll let you guys watch the Ode Ibushi interview. But obviously it makes a ton of sense to bring him back. And at the very least, you let him and Brendan Hymas compete. If they wanted to add a draft pick like in the 5th, 6th round or whatever, I wouldn't be surprised. Maybe that person could have some center guard flexibility. But in terms of free agency, I don't think we expect them to really do a whole lot at guard outside of bringing back Ode Ibushi. Am I right there?
Yeah, no, that sounds about right. The only thing is Scott Questenberry, and I do think they bring him back. I don't see why you wouldn't bring him back. He's been good for you in starts. You drafted him, but nothing's guaranteed. And listen, I don't notice these things because I don't care. But Steven noticed that Brendan Hymas was taking snaps at center just in warmups at that last Raiders game. Probably means nothing, but he was doing that.
Yeah,
maybe worth paying attention to. But yeah, pretty sure Ode Ibushi is going to be back.
Yeah, don't think there's a ton other to say on the guards. I think they probably run it back with Ibushi, or at least give him a chance to compete after the ACL injury, right? Like, he'll be really cheap. He only costs $1.5 million, $2 million this year. So, going forward, that would be probably the reasonable expectation for his salary on a year-to-year basis as well. And like you said, you can kind of have Hymas fight for it. Do we want a Trey Turner reunion, anyone? Wasn't bad this year.
I mean, the Steelers' offensive line is a lot of fool's gold, in my opinion, because Big Ben's getting rid of the ball after like half a second. But the Hymas thing was interesting. I don't know if that was the first time that he was taking center reps. It was just the first time that I had the chance to notice it. But if they want to cross train him there, I think that's totally fine. But I think he's a guard. Like, I think that him switching to center is probably a bit much. I think in an ideal world, in terms of Hymas's development, like he challenges O'Day and he beats out O'Day. Like I think from his development, that's probably like best case scenario. But I think for the Chargers, you probably bring back O'Day. He starts, he's healthy, plays more than 4 games, obviously, and then Hymas takes over the year after that in 2023.
Yeah, the whole cross training thing, we kind of sort of got to that with Abuji, and I asked him about being an emergency tackle, and then we asked about him being a center, and he's like, "Oh hell no, I'll never play center. Don't ever ask me to do that." So yeah, I think Hymas will be sticking at guard and maybe emergency tackle too.
Are we done with offensive line?
Yes, let's. Okay. We can definitely move on to running backs.
So Larry Roundtree.
I do want to start with Austin Eckler though, because he obviously had the 20 touchdowns, but he's another guy that really exceeded expectations, and we knew obviously that the Chargers had this big time Alvin Kamara-esque role in mind there. So, Alex, what'd you make of Austin Eckler's season?
It was really good, and I thought that this was, I don't think he made the Pro Bowl, right? It was an alternate, but this was a Pro Bowl caliber season from him. Rushing, receiving, really did everything for this team. And, I think the main storyline that we kind of kept going back and forth with in 2021 was just they didn't really have an RB2 to support him. We'll sort of get into that. I think Justin Jackson did well towards the end of the year, but you do have this running back in Austin Eckler who very clearly is, putting up peak production. I think you can assume the next, 1 to 2 years of his career are sort of also going to be in line with 2021 and continue that peak production. So I feel like you just have to get more support from him behind him. So then you can take the stress off, because it just became very clear that there was a midpoint in the season, not where his production went down, but he was just taking more hits, taking more of a beating. And, the physical toll that's going to take over time, that I think that will end up being somewhat of a problem if the Chargers don't fix the RB2 or RB3 situation. So we'll see what it is going forward. But as for Austin Eckler himself, he was great. And, he was everything that we've sort of expected, him to be in this offense, to be sort of that Alvin Kamara type figure. He lived up to that and more.
Yeah, it seemed to be the quietest 1,500-yard, 20 touchdown season that I can remember. I mean, everybody's like Alvin Kamara, and I think in fantasy football circles, everyone knows who Austin Eckler is, but
sure,
him not really getting that respect and the voting is, maybe he doesn't care, maybe he does, but he's a fantastic player, and they do need help. I think it was about a little before the Bengals game, and then during that Bengals game where he had 2 fumbles. It's also kind of a freak accident, but it looked like, oh man, is he kind of wearing down? At some point during the season, he got on the podium and said, "Hey, I need help. Somebody behind me has to step up and be a running back too, because I can't do this by myself. Like, I'm not physically built to be a 300 touch running back. And you're certainly not paying me all that much. You're paying me a lot, but you're not paying me $15 million a year. So with that build, with that contract, he needs some other guys behind him as well. Nice to see Justin Jackson step up, but the other guys on the team, the other 3 dudes that weren't Justin Jackson, Austin Eckler, big problem.
I think it is absolutely a big problem, and it was super weird. Like, we talked about the rotation a ton this year, how annoying it was. And I think Austin Eckler does need help. I think he had 900 yards rushing, and that's fantastic. Obviously set a career high there. But in an ideal world, he's not getting 200 carries. I think you kind of lose some of that receiving explosiveness that we are so used to seeing, because he was just being used as a complete workhorse. I mean, like, it's great to know that he can put up, a 1,500 yard season and 20 touchdowns. Like, that's awesome. But, I think in an ideal world, you have somebody that can rotate with him and at least take like 35% of the workload away from him consistently. And we saw that at the end of the season with Justin Jackson, after they finally figured out like which running back 2 they wanted to entrust with that workload. But, I think next year going forward, like, I want to see them be able to keep Eckler a little bit more fresh. And I think that will help in, the yards after catch criteria that everybody is talking about right now. It will help in the explosiveness of the offense. It will help in ideally cutting down some of his mistakes, because we talked last week about the drops. That was a rare thing for him, and obviously the pick six in Denver was off of an Austin Eckler drop. So I think keeping him fresher will help with cutting down the mistakes as well. And so NSN asked the question now, and I think that's a good time to lead into it. Justin Jackson, obviously a free agent this year, very up and down tenure with the Chargers, but when he's been on the field, he's been very explosive. The question is, do they bring him back? What do they do with Joshua Kelly and Larry Roundtree? Tyler, where are you at with the running backs behind Austin Eckler that are on the roster, and Justin Jackson, of course, there?
I think you have to bring Justin Jackson back, but I do believe as a complimentary sort of RB3. Okay, well, here's what I would do. I would bring back Justin Jackson as a complimentary RB3. Could spell him obviously as an RB2, but I think you see his work on special teams, particularly against the Denver Broncos recently. He can fly down the field and make a tackle. He can also contribute, as a running back. His per touch average was double that of Kelly and Roundtree's. So obviously, like, better player, you want him back. But I do think that they should look for somebody in free agency that could be a better yards after contact sort of guy. I think everyone's looking for a big bruiser. I don't necessarily think you have to go find a big bruiser. Obviously, Austin Eckler and Justin Jackson did well in this offense because the offensive line was so good. So if you have a good offensive line, you don't have to go out and get some big thumping bruiser sort of guy. I think you want to go for like a cheap guy. I think his contract was projected at like $2 million. Someone like a D'Ernest Johnson, who was top 5 in yards after contact average among free agent running backs. I think that's kind of a guy you should look at and go get a guy who's generally pretty fresh, kind of unknown on the cheap, but a guy who can spell Austin Eckler more as a runner. His receiving numbers weren't that great, but maybe he could work into that. You have Eckler as your hybrid, Justin Jackson as your third down back, running back, whatever. Just make a nice actual running back room, because right now, I mean, Kelly and Roundtree aren't it. I don't know what the yards after contact average was, but I can't imagine it was good. It would almost surprise me if it were positive. I know it is positive, but it feels like they just kind of hit contact, went down. The running backs behind them, behind Austin Eckler, those two guys at least, were just not good. I mean, they combined for 226 total yards on 75 touches with 3.01 yards per touch. Like I said, Justin Jackson, he literally doubled that at 6.02 yards per touch. They're going to roll with one of those guys. One of those guys is going to be the RB2. It seems like it's Joshua Kelly based on the way things played out last season, but I hate it. Like, the group stinks. And if they don't bring Justin Jackson back and they go with Roundtree, Kelly, and Eckler, I guess we're passing it, 72 more times a game, because like those guys are just not good. And everyone's like, okay, Kelly was just struggling at first year in the league. Maybe he'll be better in his second year. Maybe on a per play basis he was, but like there was just really wasn't anything there. We're having trouble on third down pass blocking, wasn't exactly being a very explosive runner, wasn't contributing on special teams. And then Larry Roundtree has -1 receiving yards this year. So you have to find something better, because it's really bad right now. But the theme of this year seems to be, I drafted these guys, we're going to go with the guys that we drafted. And I think that's no different with the running backs this year. So I would bring back Justin Jackson. I would sign a D'Ernest Johnson because the numbers make sense and the contract makes sense. And you need someone who's better with yards after contact. But they're going to go with Austin Eckler and probably the two guys that they drafted recently. And I'm going to hate it, but they probably are.
Yeah, really quickly before Alex jumps in here. So Justin Jackson averaged 3.56 yards after contact per attempt. Austin Eckler was at 3.01. Those are very good numbers, particularly Justin Jackson. That's a fantastic number. Joshua Kelly, 2 yards per attempt, yards after contact, and Larry Roundtree, 1.97. So sweet. Those are your big physical backs that are supposed to be your bruisers that are supposed to get those tough yards, and they did not do that. So I think if we're talking about like adding a running back, like I think when you look at these zone heavy rushing attacks that the Chargers are trying to do, you don't really have that big physical bruiser back. Like if you look at what the Niners have in their running back room, it's a bunch of slashers. It's a bunch of Justin Jackson, Elijah Mitchell. I forget his name from last year.
Wilson.
Wilson is another one too, but the guy who was like their leading rusher last year, I forget his name right now. I mean, Trey Sermon, who they drafted this year, but you see them like they don't have like big physical backs. They have slashers who can hit a hole and then, put your foot in the ground and then go. And so that's why I like a Dearness Johnson. That's why I like, somebody asked earlier about James Cook, the running back from Georgia. I would kind of hate drafting another running back, but it's that kind of back that you're looking for. Somebody that's a decisive one-cut runner with speed, not a physical bruiser. I just don't think it really fits in this offense. And Austin Eckler proved this year that he can do, the tough physical yards. I mean, he had 12 touchdowns and most of them were in the red zone. So my jumping in before Alex turned into a little bit of a rant there, but Alex, go ahead.
Man, who was saying that this offense didn't need a bruising running back last year? I don't know. Look, the RB3 problem, I mean, particularly when we talk about Joshua Kelly and Larry Roundtree, I don't know. Like, that was my problem when Larry Roundtree was drafted over someone like Khalil Herbert or just in the draft in general. Like, I didn't really we've talked about needing more explosiveness in this offense, and this whole chat has been, hey, we need more explosive running backs. Like, I mean, people were saying that, a year ago. People were saying that when they drafted Joshua Kelly, and still they opted for, kind of like goal line backs who aren't even that successful, like around the goal line right now, right? Or in short yardage situations. So to me, that's the issue there. As far as Justin Jackson, I think it'd be interesting to bring him back, potentially as RB2. But I do think there's a lot of interesting ways that they can go in free agency. Steven just brought up the guy who was formerly the lead runner in San Francisco, Raheem Mostert. He could, potentially be a choice there. He is an unrestricted free agent. We just talked about Cordero Patterson. I think actually in our wide receivers episode that we did on Sunday, and he sort of has that running back wide receiver flexibility if they wanted to go that route. There's really, it's a stacked free agent class. I feel like as far as those RB2s that are, can kind of have some RB1 flexibility. There's a lot of them in free agency if you just want to go on Spot Track and go down the list. But so, I mean, I think the first question that has to be answered is, do you want Justin Jackson back? If not, I do think you have to find some kind of like bona fide RB2 in this free agent class to replace him, or at least someone that you think is like capable of doing that. Particularly also someone who has that after contact ability, like we just talked about with Justin Jackson. So, they'll have to weigh the kind of pros and cons of that with the injuries that Justin Jackson's had over his last couple of years. But yeah, no, I just have such a tough time seeing Joshua Kelly or Larry Roundtree on this team. I mean, I think they're at the very least going to bring Roundtree back because they just drafted him. But I mean, the common theme that you heard in the Telesco and Staley press conferences is we expect more of Josh. I mean, like they both sort of said a version of that in their ending press conferences, and it seemed like they are kind of disappointed in what they got at RB3 and RB4 on the roster this year. Yeah, we went with 4 running backs, huh? Still funny. But no, I don't know. I just think going forward, like you have Austin Eckler, I feel confident that they can get an RB2 in some way. But, what's really going to make or break this unit is what they decide to do. If they decide to just keep 3 running backs and then keep a Roundtree or a Kelly, or are they really going to run it back with 4 again next year? And I don't see the point in that at this point. I feel like you just kind of have to cut your losses doing the big physical running back thing. I don't know why they ever did that. It never made any sense in this offense, especially when your lead running backs are Austin Eckler and Justin Jackson. But yeah, I think you have to cut your losses and try to get someone who, has some of that ability that we just talked about and could be more dynamic in this offense. James Conner, Marlon Mack, free agents as well. So those are a couple kind of guys you can go after. But yeah, I don't know how you go with Joshua Kelly and Larry Roundtree going forward, but the overwhelming likelihood is at least one of them is back.
Yeah, it's a weird situation, and I think, really kind of my theme of the off season for the offense, really just I need more competition. Like I need legitimate competition on this roster. And that's going to require this team to make some tough decisions. Of course it is. Like, if you bring back Justin Jackson and that's the only thing you do, and then Justin Jackson gets hurt again, like it's just setting yourself up for failure. It's setting Austin Eckler up for failure. And then you're putting Justin Herbert at risk. And so if Tom Telesco is really serious about improving this offense, which it seemed like it is, then they have to add competition. And please, for the love of God, do not carry 4 running backs on the roster next year. You just do not need it. And so I think if you're asking me, like, if you have Austin Eckler, like a Dearness Johnson, or even like a Sony Michel, who's a free agent, who ranked really highly in Tyler's list last year, and then Justin Jackson is RB3, like, that's a really good running back room. I feel good about that room. And you can have a bunch of different options. Somebody's pointing out Leonard Fournette in free agency. We'll have to see. I think his playoff Lenny legacy is probably going to carry him to a bigger contract than people think. But they're not going to have a super expensive, addition if they also bring back Justin Jackson. So, Darrell Williams from Kansas City as Supercharger 2197 points out, I think that's fine. He was actually really good as a receiver this year, although he does have some fumbling issues. Tyler mentioned Jeff Wilson. He's also a free agent. JaMychal Hasty from the Niners, again, that kind of connection with him and Shane Day. He finished high on Tyler's composite rankings. He's a free agent. So there are some options there. I'm not super into the idea of like going out and spending money on a big name. Like, I like Chase Edmonds a lot. I think he probably is a little bit too expensive. But they have options. And like Alex said, this is a very interesting free agent running back class. I haven't really touched the draft class, but please don't draft a running back for the third in a row. I can't do that.
Oh, they're totally going to do it. They have like 11 picks this time. That's enough for one running back. But no, I think it's going to be interesting to see what they do, because I sort of get the idea of bringing Justin Jackson back as your complimentary third running back, but I almost feel like it's running back 2 or bust with him, just because I feel like there's going to be another team out there who offers him that potential role to be an RB2, in spite of the injuries and all that, especially if it's a team that has their RB1 situation, very fortified. So I feel like he'll kind of get an opportunity somewhere else, especially with some of the advanced after contact stats we've mentioned. So I'll be curious to see what happens there. I think the most likely thing you're looking at is probably 3 to 4 running backs, depending on what they do. I would prefer 3. And then you probably go Austin Eckler, a free agent signing, whether that's Justin Jackson or somebody else. And then I really think they're going to pick between one of Roundtree and Kelly. I don't think both of them will be on the team next year. And I think you've probably seen more from Roundtree. Just going forward in terms of what his tendencies are. But Kelly also has a couple plays here and there. You're kind of not really going on a lot here when it comes to who was better in 2021. But no, I think the most likely thing is they probably obviously are running back Austin Eckler. They take one of the rookies and get another RB2 through free agency.
Rogue Deeply said use all the 6th and 7th round picks to draft a running back and hope one hits.
It's like what the Eagles are doing with receivers in the first round.
Yeah. We were having that conversation with the Eagles, potentially taking a receiver this year earlier today. And it's like, some teams in this league know how to fail fast. And like, that's a hard conversation to have. And that's not really a conversation that the Chargers have historically done. And so, they're potentially looking at Larry Roundtree and Joshua Kelly as cut candidates. And that would be a strong, alteration from their previous path under Tom Telesco. But they have to add somebody, even if, it's an undrafted free agent who kind of surprises them. Like, they just need more competition. And I just don't think they can run it back with that duo being, consistent contributors. I just don't see it happening.
The other reason that I think that Joshua Kelly is just the more likely cut candidate in general is that, we did hear, I think, Telesco sort of voice his displeasure in how his season played out in the RB2 situation. Sure. But also, Larry Roundtree is the first Brandon Staley pick. And Joshua Kelly was the, remnants of the
he was Lynn's guy.
Yeah, he was Anthony Lynn's guy who wanted to draft him in the 3rd round. So we'll see how that goes. But if you're talking about an early edge, well, obviously a lot of it will depend on preseason performance and training camp. But I would say that Roundtree has a much likelier chance to be on this roster than Kelly going forward.
This fucking sucks. I really hate this whole stupid thing.
It does.
It does, yeah. I had a funny time watching the early games from this season and seeing how involved Larry Roundtree was in the game plan and Gabe Neighbors, and then like 3 weeks later, it was like they're not even playing. So it was fun. But all right, guys, any final thoughts here before we head out for the evening?
Nope.
No, don't have too many thoughts. Enjoy the Ode Ibushi interview tomorrow. I'm gonna take these 2 Advil PMs and knock out.
Yeah, so Alex is next time we are recording, Alex will be back in a foreign country, so back to the 4-hour time difference, which will be very fun. I mentioned the Ode Ibushi interview. Will also be an interview with Fayetteville State cornerback Josh Williams, who is kind of a late round sleeper, first prospect interview of the season for us. So check those out tomorrow. As always, if you're listening to this, please leave us a rating or review on the podcast platform of your choice. Like the video and subscribe to the channel on YouTube. We do really appreciate that. Next week, we'll be talking about some other things, and we'll be doing some Senior Bowl content as that picks up. So the draft process is really starting to hum along. We're all watching prospects and grading prospects. So going to be a fun few weeks, few months of content for you guys. So thanks for tuning in tonight. We'll see you guys next time.